Are we okay to officially start in the space then?
Yeah, we're okay. We're good to go.
All right, excellent. So let's start. So very sorry about that, everyone, but that is always the way with live streaming from multiple parts of the world into a conference in a fairly regional area in South America. So as Emmanuel said in the introduction, this panel today is called Creativity, Emerging Mobile Technologies and Changing Climates. And we've got a very exciting and dynamic panel with us. And these are all people that have been associated with Balance-Unbalance in one way or another in the past. And so basically what we're going to do this morning is just have very short presentations from each of our guests, and we'll finish with a Q&A, and we will have time for a couple of brief questions between each panelist. And we're also open to taking questions online, so of course join us on Twitter, and we're happy to take questions via YouTube as well. So before we get into that, I just wanted to contextualize what we're talking about today a little bit. And before I do that, let's just double check that the people that are in the space can hear us okay and online can hear us okay. Are we all good?
We're good here.
Yeah, we're good over here.
Excellent. For those of you that don't know me and my background with Balance-Unbalance, my name's Leah Barclay, and this year I'm the chair of the virtual programs, but have been involved in Balance-Unbalance in various capacities since inception, really. And one of the key ideas that really resulted from Balance-Unbalance 2013, when we hosted it in Australia, and the inaugural conference that was hosted in Argentina and in Montreal in 2011, is that Balance-Unbalance in itself isn't just a conference. It's always been seen as this idea as a catalyst to really bring people together and really look at interdisciplinary responses to climate change. And from Ricardo's perspective, the founder of the conference, it's always been about projects and responses and actions to climate change. And it's been really inspiring over the years to see so many projects emerge from Balance-Unbalance and so many new collaborations, and really so much potential. So this panel is really a way to highlight some of the ideas that flow through different parts of Balance-Unbalance from some really interesting presenters who cross paths on various things but aren't working directly together at the moment. So it's an interesting opportunity to connect the dots and maybe start some new collaborations as well. So just to give some context of the theme of this panel, we're really looking at this idea of mobile technologies and how it's completely transformed how we're interacting in physical and virtual worlds. And most of us on this panel today are doing really interesting projects with mobile technologies at the moment that you're all going to hear about, and particularly looking at the role of things like virtual reality and augmented reality in conservation and climate change. I'm not going to go into the brief of our panel in detail because I think everyone who's in the room today and online would agree that climate change is certainly one of the most, if not the most, critical issue we're currently facing, and naturally Balance-Unbalance has been set up as a way to respond to climate change with truly interdisciplinary frameworks and looking at the role of the arts in this process. So everyone on the panel is a pioneer in that capacity in really pushing the boundaries of what role the arts can play in climate change. So I'm going to briefly introduce the presenters before they speak. And we're going to start with Kate Genevieve, who's actually in New York at the moment. And she's sitting there beside Nina from the Streaming Museum, who will be presenting finally. And Kate is actually from Brighton, and I first came across Kate's work at an event called Scans in New Zealand, which I'm sure many of you at Balance-Unbalance have heard about. We've got a few Scans people presenting at Balance-Unbalance this year, and that's an event that has quite a similar intention to Balance-Unbalance in looking at bringing artists and scientists and Indigenous communities together to respond to climate change. So Kate has been doing some fascinating work over the last few years, and we continue to cross paths on all of these exciting projects. So Kate's going to talk to us today about her current work and some of the really interesting projects she's been doing in ecological virtual reality, or eco-VR. So over to you, Kate.
I'm speaking now. Is this my presentation moment?
This is your presentation moment.
Oh, right. I thought we were introing everyone. So I have 10 minutes to speak.
Correct.
Right. That was unexpected. So, hi. I'm Kate, and I've been making projects which mix the virtual and the real as long as I've been a creative artist. And I started working with virtual reality in 2010, really exploring how people could have these virtual experiences and then be very much in a real environment and interact with that environment. One of the reasons why I'm trying to sort of make that bridge is because I do think one of the risks of virtual reality is that it becomes yet another escapist consumer experience. And well, it can be very closed off, actually. I once did a project which was created originally in Scans in New Zealand and showed it in a gallery. And the audio recording used was the audio we'd recorded in New Zealand, and we'd made these 3D simulated natural environments. And the first time we did it, when we took the goggles off, it was very, very often people were crying. And that really brought something home to me. I think, one, it brought home that VR, you know, despite the fact that there's a lot of hype about it at the moment, can actually have this huge emotional reaction, in that it is a technology that has been long dreamed about and long imagined, and there is some frisson of it being new that affects people. But there was also the feeling that in some way they were having a mediated experience of a world that was being lost, that the natural world might just be available to us through these virtual experiences sometime in the future. So that was sort of exactly not the kind of message that I wanted to be creating, and we took that project outside. So I've been really working with how to mix up these virtual experiences with experiences of being on the land itself. And I think mobiles and Google Cardboard have made this task so much easier. The project that I'm working at the moment is called Of the Spheres, and it's a site-specific project for a place called the Crowick Multiverse in Scotland, which is a quite epic piece of land art, which it stretches over acres, and it's shaped into currents. It maps the solar system and Andromeda, basically the current understanding we have scientifically of the universe around us. And it invokes this really ancient process of ritual and prehistoric monuments like Stonehenge, but really being on the land and being aware of one's own humanity on the earth and under the stars. And the project that I'm using it basically requires the participants to go on a solitary journey. They have to climb a mound. It's very, it is quite a, we're asking them on an adventure, basically, because I think one thing that virtual reality can do is reframe this notion of the climate crisis. I think people are quite exhausted around the sense that there's a crisis, and you can't really respond imaginatively or creatively to that. I've done so many interviews with people over the last few years where they have, you know, it's not that people don't care. It is a sense of being really outside the story, like they're trapped inside a overarching suicidal story that they can't do anything about. And so, you know, why would you think about climate change? You know, why would you do anything but hide your head in the sand if you don't have any personal agency in that? So this project is very much about awakening in a very performative way this sense of being a human on the land and asking people into a ritual where they have to stride over the land, walk up these mounds, put on these virtual reality goggles and have an experience which uses data about sea change and data that we have back from NASA about the stars, and just try to start kind of awakening the wonder of what it is to balance the kinds of information that we have and the technology that we're using, rather than feeling completely swamped by it. And I guess that reframing of the climate issue is, I think, something that's really made possible too by 360 video and the way that opens up new opportunities to, you know, not hear an argument about what, you know, what the details of the climate crisis and why we are in trouble, but spend some time just listening and being in a mediated way in another place on Earth that is affected. And Toby and me have just been in Vanuatu, which is one of the Pacific islands affected by sea change. And you know, we did interviews around the subject of how people felt about the climate crisis and how they, you know, what their hopes were for the future, and those really weren't the most affecting thing. In the end, it really was the songs of the community and creating an experience that just opened the life of that place and allow people to open their own spheres of experience and experience something just naturally unfolding. We did a lot of filming where people were just making meals in the Luritan community village, which we worked at, and they'd be singing, and you know, this is just normal human life, and that way of connecting to normal, everyday human life through these technologies is something that I think is really opening our minds to the different modes of experience that go on Earth. So one of the things we're actually doing is making a little box to send back this Google Cardboard experience that we're making to that community, which I think is a very important part of building those relationships. You know, that you can't really go to another place on a completely new place and think that you have any sort of real understanding of the culture. So we see it as the beginning of a communication, and these boxes that we send will include instructions about how to use the experience, which isn't just unfold the Google Cardboard and put your phone inside, but also asks them to, you know, go outside and be on a bit of the land that they love and feel the wind against their skin, so that in some way through instructions and instructional based performance is something I've worked in a lot, you can invoke a kind of ritual with those experiences. I guess one of the things I've noticed is that everyone is so overloaded with apps that the app can be a very disposable form. You know, people can sort of download it, peek into it, get about 2 minutes worth of it, and then, you know, off it goes. And what I've really been challenged by over the last 3 years is wanting to make creative projects that are not some sort of advertising campaign around climate issues that make people feel like they're connected to these issues, so that they don't really have to do anything further. And that question of action is the one that keeps on coming up at the moment. And I guess this was something that we really explored during the COP21 when I was there as an artist, and a lot of other artists were there too, and activists. And that sense of mobilizing creativity into some action form, rather than simply communicating the message, started to make so much sense to me. And there was a really healthy culture there of people who are using projects to in some way prototype what was possible in the future. So the last project I wanted to mention, which is very much in construction, is a project called Cascade, and I started it there by seeing the city itself as a form of a constructed reality, and not a constructed reality that was impervious to change. It is something that requires our agreement on to make it work and to operate. So I was planting messages around the city as a sort of game for the streets, and drawing chalk doors on walls, really invoking this idea poetically but also physically, that there was something in the whole climate question that demanded an imaginative, creative approach to imagine doors where other people saw walls. And we're taking this back to Brighton in September, and are setting it up as a game for the city streets, which involves little 360 videos plotted on these streets, using the people of Brighton speaking about how they would like to live differently. And that is, it is fun, and it is also a work of social, you know, this idea that we're all co-creating our communities. I think my attempt with this project is to really make it mischievous, to give people permission to go out on the streets and live differently in their own cities and do things differently, and to make that link between an experience that you might have through immersive media and the immersion that we're always in, which is like the fabric of social reality. And the project is going to be, it's completely collaborative, so it's difficult to sort of imagine where it will go. But the idea is that it's an open invitation using these VR spheres, which get people lots and lots and lots of different perspectives on the question. I think that is something which is really necessary, like a diversity and a multiplicity of imaginations on this, and a way of making that much more visible. And so finally, have I got 2 minutes left?
Sure.
Okay. I wanted to just really, I guess, express that I see the potential of mobile VR and more extended forms of virtual reality to really get us thinking seriously about how a message is conveyed and received, and to make that link between sensing information and giving people a mode of acting upon it. So some of the other things I've been doing is working with climate data in 3D forms and thinking about how you might be able to feel that through a sense of touch, and to expand our own knowledge around our sensory systems to kind of make this situation of being on a planet where we have so much information about what is going on in this planet, to make that more directly feelable and tangible, and also to think about how VR might change, not just in the content that we're using to show it, not just by making experiences which are focused on refugees or all sorts of issues, but in its modes of use, how being with other people in virtual worlds and learning to kind of co-create worlds, which interactive games have given us many years of starting to practice that actually might be a hugely useful way of extending our sense of creativity and co-creating worlds together. So I think I'll stop there. That is why I'm very interested in it as a particular tool for both transporting people, and I guess this is my fundamental finish, which is it's not about selling an issue. We're not trying to sell the climate issue as a meme that can go viral. Things go viral every day, and it's different every day. I think what immersive media can do is ask people to listen to their own bodies and connect with their own ways of listening and feeling in the world, that they are truly a part of this earth, to sort of to give something back about feeling in connection. And that feels to me like it can shift, like a much more long-term behavioral shift of feeling and sensing as part of the earth, and seeing the climate crisis as something that we all have to, together wherever we are, in some way focus some of our creative action on what we can do ourselves.
Nice. That was all fascinating, Kate. Thank you very much. And an incredible starting point for all of these conversations. Yeah, really amazing work you're doing. We probably can take just one or two questions briefly and then move straight along, so we make sure we leave enough time for everyone. So, Emmanuel, are there any questions in the room? We'll prioritise the room first, and then maybe any questions between the panellists for Kate. And I think talking about listening to the body is a perfect segue into what Toby is going to talk about, and also what Melissa is going to talk about as well. So before we do that, any questions in the room, Emmanuel?
Question, yes. Yeah, we have a question. Yes. Do you want to? No question?
So questions will need to, come up to your microphone there so we can hear as well.
Yeah, don't think we have any questions here, so I thought we could.
No questions in the room?
No questions.
All right. Any questions amongst ourselves? Toby, Nina, Melissa, for Kate? What was that? You'll have to talk a little bit louder, Nina.
Yeah, I was just mentioning, she spoke about the Brighton project. That sounds very interesting, getting the input of the people in the town or city.
Yeah, I think that was for me when and Leah, you were at COP21 as well, but being in the spaces where the actions were being planned, there was a huge multitude of people there, all doing completely different projects and coming at it from completely different angles, but working with the sense that they were all there for a higher cause than their own personal ego issues. And that sense of actually people creatively working together to do a diverse, a completely diverse range of projects and having completely different styles. I've never experienced that on such a large scale before, and for me, it really gave me a sense of you have to, as someone who is lucky enough to experience that possibility, it's something that you can take back to wherever you live and explore whether that is a replicatable thing. It certainly is, and the climate crisis, is I'm trying not to use that phrase anymore, because what we're really talking about is structural change over every single sector. So it needs so many different lines and so many different approaches on it, and yet it also needs a sort of visibility and a creative vision behind it, so that it can somehow be shared and made meaningful and cohere people rather than separate people. I always find comedy fun. I mean, this is how I imagine it. Who knows how it will be? But I like the English culture has this big history of like Monty Python and sort of tomfoolery in the streets. And for me, that is a really exciting way of actually getting people engaged.
All right, excellent. Well, I mean, I have a few questions, but I think it's probably better if we save them to the end and move on to the next presenters, so we've got enough time to have a discussion at the end. So we have 3 presentations to go in this session. So next we're going to hear from Toby Gifford, who's in the same country as me at the moment. It's very early for both of us in Australia. And Toby is many things, including an artist, a music technologist, scientist, and many other things in between. And so Toby's going to be discussing some of the connections between the work in EcoVR that he's been doing with Kate, and he's also been involved in a number of other projects, including the Augmented Reality Rainforest Listening Project that Melissa will be talking about next, and is certainly an advocate for the role that sound can play in responding to climate change. So I think the points that Kate was making at the end of her presentation are a really nice segue into what Toby is going to talk about. So over to you, Toby.
Thanks, Leah. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Toby. As Leah said, I'm in Brisbane at the moment, very early in the morning. Very happy to be here. So yeah, I'm, as Leah said, many things, but I guess my current incarnation is as a sound artist and music technologist working at this kind of science arts nexus. My background is originally in science, but with artistic practice sort of lifelong, and so I've always been interested in this, you know, kind of refiring of the Renaissance of kind of making science and arts, you know, joining the two cultures back together. And the truth is, it's just really difficult because the two cultures have different sets of values and different approaches and different things, different epistemologies, essentially. So the work I've been doing, particularly with Leah in a river listening project, which is about trying to make art and science meet in the ecology of river ecosystems, is really trying to, like Kate was saying, kind of get away from this sense that a science-arts collaboration is either using art to communicate a message about science, or conversely using science as a kind of a inspiration for your artwork. But, you know, so where one is kind of in service to the other, or vice versa. So I've been really trying to look at ways in which artistic approaches can you know, add something genuine to a scientific perspective, and science in turn can, you know, add genuine aesthetic value at a more than just an inspirational level, sort of a fundamental conceptual level. Interestingly, though, my experience in Paris kind of changed my own mind about this a bit, in that I think I saw the power of art communicating a message. I mean, I'm in no way against that. I think it's great. But yeah, I'll go on a bit more about that later. But yeah, it was interesting for me to see that that really could be powerful. In any case, so I'm interested in what I call oral embodiment, which is this sense that a lot more of the way that we perceive the world and that we are is mediated through sound than, you know, people generally acknowledge or sort of realise. And Also, this idea of embodiment is very important to me, which makes virtual reality is kind of an interesting problem child in a way, in that, you know, a lot of what I'm interested in is re-engaging with how we are in an environment, and similarly, how to get people to re-engage with the natural physical environment. And yeah, so I've been interested in augmented reality for that reason for some time, because I think that as amazing as the Vive is and as transportative as these latest VR experiences are, there's still not, you know, there's only 2 of the 5 senses that they're engaging with. You've still got your sense and your touch and your proprioception, and then the other 20 senses that you haven't acknowledged yet, but will someday, no doubt. And so, for me, augmented reality is a really nice way of combining those, you know, keeping that corporal sensibility and layering that with kind of information. And so, yes, well, I met Kate in Paris, where Leah and I were working on this rainforest listening project. And what was interesting to me about that project, which I'll let Melissa talk about, since that's what she's going to talk about. But what was interesting for me was that, having been interested and kind of active in this climate change space for 30 years now, I think it's important to realise that it's not a scientific problem. So there's, you know, there's research grants over here in Australia that can be obtained for the science of climate change and all this stuff. And I mean, look, the reality is the science is complex, but the important bit of the science is really simple. It's just stop burning fossil fuels, you know. And we've known that for 30 years. Everyone's known it. But actually doing it is not that simple. But it's not a scientific problem, it's a social problem. And as I see it, the only real way to get movement on that is, I mean, the politicians know it too, and that was the interesting thing about being at those Paris talks and sort of talking to some of the negotiators in a less formal setting, is they all agreed, and, you know, they knew what needed to be done, and it was more about just the fact that they needed political leverage. You know, they needed the political ability to do these things, and for me, that only comes from a broad-scale, people-based movement. So you've got to get the people on side before you can make the policies and so on. And so, yeah, these kind of mass distributed kind of awareness things, even though they might be incredibly shallow in terms of the actual depth of content, I suppose. It's just like a, hey, climate, think about it. But in a sense, that is the required complexity. I mean, because the actual things needed to be done are quite simple. It's just the mechanism of social apparatus built around all of that is quite difficult to negotiate. Anyway, moving back a bit to this kind of meeting of science and art in connecting to the world. I was reflecting a little while ago about a job I did 20 years ago, working for the Australian Seismology organisation, Bureau of Mineral Resources. So it's basically earthquake monitoring, and it hadn't really occurred to me at the time, this was sort of before I moved into sound, that a seismometer, which is this apparatus you have on the ground which, you know, detects earthquakes, is actually a microphone. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's just detecting the vibrations moving through the earth of the rock. And at that time, we were, the particular unit I was working in was the nuclear test ban proliferation treaty monitoring unit. So basically what we do is we sit around with all our feeds from these acoustic Earth measurers all around the world, and if anyone let off a nuclear explosion, basically you could tell straight away where it was and how strong and blah blah blah, which is kind of cool. So it's this kind of really physical and quite instant, well, not instant, but quite quick connection to large-scale events that are happening around the world of importance. What was also interesting was, despite the fact that all these countries had signed on to the moratorium test ban, there was about one a week being let off the whole time that I was there, which was in the 90s. But even more interesting than that for me was that the setup was there was a bunch of boffins like myself looking at the squiggly lines of these seismographs, which is basically a sound audio file, but very low frequency, and running all our complicated analyses and mathematical models to figure out where it came from and triangulate and so on. But this was actually a 24-hour facility, and they had these old ladies, basically, who I suspect had been there probably since, the 50s, watching these squiggles too. And, I mean, they were amazing. This squiggle really just does look like a squiggle to me, until you run it through the mathematical models. But these ladies could just, they'd show you a bit of a thing and they go, there we go, Yangshuan province, 30 megatons, 9 a.m. this morning. How do you do that? And I think the point of that for me was that the human mind has an amazing capacity for pattern matching. And you definitely find this in sort of bioacoustic audio monitoring of, for example, wildlife populations and so on that's very popular these days. There's a lot of quite clever artificial intelligence analytical tools that one can do on sound, but at the end of the day, it's quite amazing how much the ear can pick out that computers can't yet. And so for me, this area is a really nice way where science and art can kind of meet in this sense of taking the pulse of the earth, I suppose, by listening to it and realizing that there's some kind of aesthetic measure, or measure is really not the right word. So aesthetics are a genuinely interesting way of looking at this data that we've yet to program a computer to understand.
Nice. Thanks, Toby.
No worries.
Mind explosion. That was really fascinating, and I think if it's cool with you, we might move straight on to Melissa and Nina and then do a Q&A at the end, just because I realise that we potentially are going to run out of time. But I think that whole kind of world of thinking about, well, sound the way you just framed it then is also a perfect segue, somewhat unintentionally, into what Melissa is going to talk about. And Melissa has been working as the creative director of Rainforest Partnership, which is a Austin-based international NGO that is essentially working with Indigenous communities in the Amazon, and she will talk in detail about what they're actually doing. But Melissa, more broadly, is specialising in branding and communication and strategic approaches to responses to climate change and conservation. And she's been working over the last year on a number of creative initiatives, one of them including Rainforest Listening, which, in fact, everyone on the panel has been involved in some capacity. Emmanuel was talking about it in the Biosphere Soundscapes presentation at Balance-Unbalance yesterday, which some of you may have been at, and naturally Kate and Toby were with the project in Paris, and Nina has also been supporting the project in New York as part of the exhibition that she will be talking about. So Melissa is going to talk about rainforest listening from her perspective, and I think in the context of Balance-Unbalance, when we're looking at all of these interdisciplinary approaches, it's really interesting to be able to hear perspectives from someone like Melissa, who is obviously coming at this from a very different direction, but certainly with the same intentions at heart. So over to you, Melissa.
Hi, everyone. I am excited to connect with everyone here. And yes, I'm going to talk about this in a very different way from Toby and Kate, but they have inspired me to kind of mix up what I was going to say a little. I'm not an artist, but I do enjoy working with artists, and I've worked with Leah and Toby a bit on rainforest listening, and so I will speak a little differently about what everything's happening today on the panel. But I am with Rainforest Partnership, and we're an Austin-based NGO, as Leah mentioned, working to protect tropical rainforest. We do it in two very different ways. First, locally on the ground with Amazonian indigenous communities, helping them come up with alternative incomes to selling their land, which basically means projects like ecotourism or artisan handicrafts, anything we can do to inspire and empower them to save their own land. The second way is what we're going to talk about today a little bit, is on a global level, is educating people and encouraging people to be conscious consumers, or at least realizing the importance of rainforests and that we're all connected, which I think is what we've all been kind of speaking about in any way. Just a little bit about rainforests. I'm sure you all know they're very important to the climate crisis. They only make up about 2% of the rainforest, and they give us about 40% of our oxygen. The Amazon basin alone gives us about 20% of our oxygen. They're home to 350 million people across the globe. They hold 50% of our biodiversity. And those are just a few things that make rainforests so important. We're losing them quickly. Nearly 4,500 acres an hour, which means by the end of this conference today, we will have lost an area of land the size of Manizales. Hope I said that correctly. Just today. But that brings us kind of to why we're here and Balance-Unbalance. It's, as we know, an exciting time for art, technology, as you've heard from some very inspiring artists doing some amazing things across the globe. And mobile technology has changed. I'm coming out from a communication standpoint, and in recent years, it's been constraining. We've just been filling out the space. But with all of these new ways to create these immersive experiences and reach a larger audience, it's been kind of an amazing way to reach people differently. For Rainforest Listening, as Leah mentioned, is an augmented reality project that layers rainforest sounds across urban environments. And it is in your venues right now. So hopefully you've experienced a bit of that magic and can at least feel and hear what we're talking about a little bit. If Rainforest Listening, if you're interested, was launched in Climate Week in 2015 with over 300 downloads in 48 hours. It's then moved to Austin, Texas for South by Eco, and of course then on to Paris, where everyone apparently was but me, experiencing some amazing, powerful things for our planet. But since then, we've had over 20,000 streams of Rainforest Listening, which I don't know if that means a lot to a lot of people, but to me it means impact. If I were to hold events for Rainforest Partnership and Rainforest Conservation in each of those cities, I would have never reached that many people. So it's kind of, it's really special for rainforest conservation organizations like Rainforest Partnership. But even more, it's a different experience because I've been sharing pictures, I've been posting photos, I've been spreading memes, as Kate said, for a year now. And we still get the same kind of questions like why rainforest, why Austin? But with listening, it has connected people in such a different way than any sensory experience that I have been using in the past year, besides maybe taking a trip to the rainforest, which is quite the magical experience. And we can use these sounds to make people think differently, and we really have. It's provided me the opportunity to begin conversations with people who may not have been interested, or to have different conversations. And each experience is different for each person who downloads the app and walks and walks and enjoys. And just like walking through the rainforest, everyone's experience will be very different. And one of my favorite parts is that we all become artists. So while we're not maybe creating these beautiful works of art in Scotland or Australia, we become the artist, and we have the power to compose our own experience. And every time will be different for every person. The first time I experienced rainforest listening was in Times Square, and it was the madness of Times Square, I should say. And you have people put on these headphones, and their shoulders like visibly kind of roll back, and their face relaxes, and they have these huge smiles. And afterwards, they always have these great questions, even from like, why, what did we record, what exact animals are there, how many animals, to where were you, to how can we impact that area that we just heard. So they're connecting on this amazing level that no meme has ever been able to accomplish. The same with the Eiffel Tower. I wasn't there, unfortunately, but I've heard the experiences, and just telling people about sound in a vertical way, where they could experience each layer of the rainforest as they moved up the observatory towers of the Eiffel Tower. They're experiencing a rainforest in a way that none of us probably will ever get to experience. And to realize that there's more than just the understory of the rainforest or the canopy where they're seeing the howler monkeys. It's all connected, and then they are actually now, because of this experience, connected to the rainforest and thinking in a very different way. Others at Times Square asked about how the power that was used in Times Square would equate to forest loss, which is an interesting concept, and I don't know the answer to that. And we even saw, as Kate said, tears. People were emotional from hearing some of these sounds that they would have never heard. Or, I mean, most people will never experience the rainforest. So bringing the rainforest to them and being able to have these real conversations about what it means to be in that space but connected to something so far away, and kind of, everything we do matters. They began to talk more about what they were listening to as opposed to what they were seeing, and thank goodness, because seeing in Times Square is just scary. But rainforest listening is more than just art, and it is amazing art, but it's a research project. And in the coming months, we'll install recording devices and live streaming networks in some of our rainforest communities. And what that really means is it gives us the opportunity to monitor climate in real time, to know what's going on in our forests, which our daily or weekly Skype call is very different than real-time hearing the change in the monkeys or the birds or even the insects, what's going on in our environment at that time, that we can only find out by listening. The tech will also be, which is interesting from what Kate was talking about, we will connect our rainforest communities to communities around the world. They'll be able to share their stories. We will be able to experience their struggles. I think that's something that we forget, is that they're there experiencing something that we could be causing. And so hopefully it's a way for us to kind of realize that what we're doing here and our actions here will affect what's happening to these communities. So the opportunity for real-time data and connections to the rainforest will be a game changer for rainforest conservation, at least in my opinion, and I think you'll be seeing more and more of that, and hopefully you'll hear and learn some of that at Balance-Unbalance as well. But it's going to change how we communicate about conservation, how we connect and create empathy for our rainforest, and actually we'll be able to use this to monitor the impact of how these initiatives are actually working in our forests. So it's not as beautiful of a picture as I know Toby and Kate have painted for you, but it's going to change the way that we communicate. And as of now, what we have been doing, as we all know, hasn't worked. And hopefully these new ways of connecting art and technology will have, and connecting us, will have a different impact on what we do and our decisions going forward. And hopefully you download the app and experience it for yourself. And I'm happy to hear about your experiences and your thoughts on rainforest conservation. And of course, if you're willing and wanting to help, we always need help. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. That was fantastic. I might be slightly biased on your presentation, but yeah, that was all really fascinating. If it's okay with you, we might move straight on to Nina and then take some questions at the end and connect all the dots, unless there's any burning questions in the room, Emmanuel.
Any questions? No, I think so.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, we are running out of time, so we might move straight on to Nina, and then we'll finish with a Q&A, and we may run a little bit over time, and there is another panel happening virtually straight after this one, which we'll just briefly promote at the end of this session as well. So we're going to move straight on to Nina now, who is an absolute pioneer in many of the things that we're talking about, and is the founder and director of the Streaming Museum based in New York City, which I'm sure she's going to talk about, and is currently developing a global program that has the potential to be the world's largest exhibition, I would think, called A View from the Cloud, which she will be talking about now. And we are going to play a short video from A View from the Cloud, and so in the background I'm going to load that up for you, Nina.
Okay, great. Well, I should start with the fact that Streaming Museum was launched in 2008, and I prepare exhibitions and tour them to 7 continents, to public spaces, partner cultural centers, and then the programs are viewed online also. So now I want to use this network to spread the word about sustainability and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm partnering now with World Council of People for the United Nations on this project, A View from the Cloud, and we launched it in September at the Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza with the astronaut Ron Garan and the Assistant Secretary General on Climate Change, Yanis Pastor, several international artists, and the Film Planetary. So we launched with this perspective of Earth, looking at the Earth from space, which is called the overview effect, and has certainly influenced many astronauts who have experienced it. So A View from the Cloud now is a multi-year international touring program of arts, innovation, and international affairs. And we're aiming to bring a world view through this network and reach as many people as we can around the world. And we want to inspire them to engage with sustainable systems and products and the practical needs of sustainability. So we're emphasizing creative technology, art, and media, because they have mechanisms for solving these world problems using data and code, internet, electronics. So we all know about the inspiring empathy-building capabilities of the arts and gaming, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. And we want to make these connections with the sciences and policymakers, people who are developing the innovations in transportation and energy and all these different fields. We're working with some really brilliant, exciting people, like the neuroscientist Emile Bruneau, who is using data from the EEG brain scans to understand the roots of cultural and power conflicts, you know, the cultural biases and so on. He's actually studying the brain, and they are devising preventive interventions from this data. And then Sarah Williams, who's the director of the Civic Data Design Lab at MIT. She's collaborating with in developing communities to collect data so they can participate in developing mobile systems for transportation and health. So it's getting the people to participate. And then companies like Vodafone, who are bringing mobile phones to developing regions, which are really helping and saving lives. So the arts and the media can express all of this and bring these positive things to the world and inspire more actions. So also, creative tech can change the corporate culture by proving with data that economic growth and profit from sustainable industries is possible, and that corporations will benefit from a world that is not suffering. And by capturing the attention of the masses and stimulating popular demand for sustainable products and systems, this will put pressure on corporations to actually start producing more in these areas. So the thing is that according to scientists at Rensselaer Polytech Institute, when just 10% of the population holds an unshakable belief, their belief will always be adapted by the majority of society. So that means that if art, media, creative tech, and comedy, which is very important and effective, if they can motivate 10% of the population to engage in sustainability, they can be considered a climate change solution, along with renewable energy, transportation, health, and other systems that are being developed. So finally, I want to say that we're working on this globally touring project that will go to public spaces and partnering cultural centers. We have education programs and just a large range of programs. But the next program will be at the United Nations in collaboration with my co-producer, World Council of People for the United Nations. And it's called A View from the Cloud, Paths to Environmental and Social Justice Through Data, Creative Tech, and Art. So now, Leah, I think that you can play this short video that is an overview of the areas we're going to be focusing on, and kind of a short review of our project that we presented in September at Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza.
Yes, I will do that. This should work.
Starts in a frame and then it grows until it exceeds the boundaries of the frame it's in. This one appears kind of architectural and industrial. is about how present economic systems are all about growth. According to the metaphor of this piece, we will reach a point where we've expanded beyond the frame of what we're able to contain. We may be using more resources than we have, putting out more pollutants that will change the frame of the natural world.
I welcome you to Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza. In the name of Dag Hammarskjöld, our second Secretary General, we must remember that he was passionately an art lover, a lover of nature. He was a prolific writer.
World Council of Peoples for the United Nations is a non-governmental organization associated to the UN. We are partnering with Streaming Museum to co-produce a multi-year series of programming called A View from the Cloud, which is inspired by this concept of stepping outside of the boundaries of this earth to put things in perspective and looking at the arts as a beacon for the rest of us.
The artists that we will be working with during the course of the multi-year A View from the Cloud are big picture thinkers. Edwina Sands, Maxie Cohen, Michael Najjar, Marty St. James, John Simon Jr., Marina Zerkow, Rogan Wenk-Wolf.
There are still many hurdles on the road to Paris, but they can be met with strong leadership and a committed electorate. Building support for the new global goals and for a climate agreement are essential, and it is extremely gratifying to see such support from the arts to educate and energize people's understanding of what is at stake.
Mr. Pastor has really explained the connection between the Sustainable Development Goals, climate change, and everybody's role in this process.
It took being separated from the only world I ever knew before that really hit me. And I felt, I guess the only way to describe it is a kinship with everybody that's riding through the universe together.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. So we are going to run just a little bit over time, but we want to finish this session with a Q&A between the panelists and between the people in the room. So firstly, I just wanted to thank you all very much for being part of this panel today. It was quite a diverse panel, obviously capturing people in different geographic locations, but also working on very different projects, but with a similar intention as well. And I'm sure you'll all agree that sound is quite prevalent through a lot of these ideas, which has certainly been a point that we've made at Balance-Unbalance over the years as well. Acoustic ecology has always been a really strong theme through the conference. So before we open to the space, do any of the panelists have any questions for each other after hearing all of those fascinating presentations?
can't remember the question. I've got a question, but I'm going to let everyone else ask first because I can't quite answer the question yet.
Sure. Do we want to open it up to the space briefly, Emmanuel, and then chat amongst ourselves? Are there any questions in the room?
The questions, Rob, Eric? So do you have a question? Well, I do have a question, actually. I was just wondering, like, all of this is very fascinating, and working with different disciplines, of course, has brought you a lot of success and really interesting ideas. But I was just wondering what sort of challenges you faced when, you know, crossing over other areas that are not actually yours. So, yeah, that's my question.
I mean, I'm happy to respond to that, but does anyone else want to respond first?
Let's hear your response first.
Sure. Well, I could just say briefly, I mean, working on art-science collaborations has always been a challenge and will always be a challenge, particularly as a musician, artist coming from a creative background. It certainly takes a lot of time and persistence to engage in truly meaningful art-science collaborations. And I think the project that Toby was talking about, River Listing, is a good example of something that we have tried to start with a my alarm's going off to tell us to finish. It's something that we've tried to start with a truly interdisciplinary foundation, in that there's an equal balance between art and science. Toby and I have been working with a incredible scientist, Dr. Simon Linke, who's also based here in Brisbane, and that's not to say there hasn't been challenges with our particular project and challenges with where we're presenting the work and challenges with funding bodies, but I think, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, if you invest the time in those relationships and are persistent about the collaboration, then it's definitely worth it. I don't know if Toby wants to add to my slightly vague answer to that question.
Oh, I don't hear this.
No, you're muted, Toby. No, you're muted. Now you should be back. Are you back? No. Okay. Nina, Kate, Melissa, do you want to add anything to that?
It's the question, were you questioning whether if you don't know a certain field, you shouldn't try to expand into it or incorporate it into your project? Is that what the question?
I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Emmanuel, but I think he was asking more about the challenges with interdisciplinary collaborations. So obviously all of us, you know, have a background in a particular field, and as much as we are all as interdisciplinary as possible, I think the question was more around the challenges of facilitating those interdisciplinary collaborations.
Right, and I don't think that you should fear, you know, trying to get involved with scientists or financial people or policymakers if it's not your field, because some of the greatest breakthroughs were just people just trying stuff and experimenting, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, I second that as well. I mean, art and technology are definitely not my background or my experience, but what we've been able to accomplish, it may have taken a little bit longer for me to understand everything, or for us to communicate that to our donors and our supporters. But in the end, it's been an amazing experience. So I have to second that I didn't know any of these things going in, but they've been great for rainforest conservation and rainforest partnership.
Right, and also it helps you interpret for other people who don't know those fields.
Yeah.
So like you're sifting this information and you're feeding it out in a way that anybody can understand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been I encourage more of the interdisciplinary workings, because it really has been something that we've seen. It's been really positive, and it can only get better.
Can I make a point?
Absolutely.
I guess I would really emphasize that it is actually sometimes incredibly difficult to work across disciplines. And I mean, I find myself reliant on data scientists for some of my projects, and that reliance is something that doesn't feel good. So, but it's a necessity if you want to create interdisciplinary projects. Then there is a sort of coming to terms with the fact that you can't know everything, and you are in some sense reliant on other people to see your blind spots. And that, as long as there is good communication and people are accepting of the sort of the places where your fields don't meet, as well as the places where you're interested in meeting, that can work out. But you know, the problem is that if you have been working in one discipline, you've got this sense of like foundational values that actually might not necessarily map across. Like I've had commercial coders work with performance artists, and they have very different assumptions about you know, what the aims are and why they're doing things, and sort of different aims that they want to manifest through the project. And I used to have this sense that we could all sort of get on board and share the same values at the core of the project. I don't actually think that's true anymore, and I think part of the artwork is the collaboration of bringing diverse people with diverse skills and diverse impulses and diverse aims and understandings of the world in some form of temporary harmonious creation. And that, my God, you know, I've had such a learning on the different ways that that can work and the different ways that that can go awry. And yeah, that acceptance of the limits of other people is just so vital if interdisciplinary projects are to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Emmanuel, any more questions in the space?
No, I don't think there's any questions. Any question, anyone else? Eric, I do want to come to the microphone.
Hi, everyone. I was just wondering if there were specific forms of data that actually get collected in the mobile audio streams.
I can talk to that, or Melissa can, or Toby can, actually.
Yeah,
do you want me to talk
to
it? All right. Yes, is the answer to that question, and we can essentially collect whatever data we need through the apps that we're developing. We're using, as many of you know, a platform called Reco, and we've made some modifications to that. And so in terms of the data that we can access, we can essentially collect information on how many people are listening, who's listening, where they're listening, how long they're listening for, where they're walking to, which sounds they listen to for a longer period of time, and where the app actually directs them through a space. So there's some really interesting information that we can collect from all of that, and the latest version of the app that we're currently developing is very responsive to the time of day and the location and things like the weather, so we'll be able to collect data on all of that as well. Does that answer your question, Eric?
Yes, it says yes.
Excellent. So, are there any questions amongst the panelists? Otherwise, we should probably come to a close pretty soon, because the next panel is starting very soon. Do any of the panelists have any questions or comments from each other after hearing everyone speak?
I have something for Toby. I still don't know if it is going to come out as a question, but I'll have a go.
Okay, go for it.
You mentioned that in Paris you sort of had a sea change of how you felt about projects that could really get into public consciousness and the potentials that had. And I also felt that, but felt that there were so many different projects that had such different multi-layered approaches and that had different audiences. Like there were the climate games, which were really appealing to a kind of hacker active audience. And I just remembered the Olafur Eliasson icebergs that we saw in the town square, and the kinds of like states of rapture and excitement that people were having just going around these big lumps of ice. And I don't necessarily think there was a engagement with the climate crisis in any particularly conscious way, but it was such a powerful piece of augmented reality that you wonder how that will come out as an experience, you know, years later, how people hold that in their memory. So it hasn't, unfortunately, turned into a question. But Toby, can you speak to that in some way? Like, there's this navigation around like what becomes a meme for a day and what stays with someone and gradually shifts their compass for, you know, through the years. And that is where art and artists make a difference. It's so hard to even think about measuring that, right?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Great. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the you know, the elephant in the room is the lack of kind of readily apparent actions for people to take. You know, I mean, that really was kind of the overwhelming vibe that I got from Paris, was that everyone was like, yes, yes, what? I don't know. So, you know, I think that's the next. But I mean, just getting to that yes point is a major victory and a giant move from where the world was just a year ago. But I think that yes, art and, you know, well thought out artistic interventions have the potential to actually suggest concrete actions that people can take, and that's personally where I'm wanting to, you know, devote my energies to next. Does that answer your question?
More exciting announcements coming soon, right, Toby?
Hopefully, yeah.
All right, I think we should close there because I'm getting some messages that we want to start teching for the next panel. So I just wanted to say a special thank you to Toby, who's in Brisbane, Kate and Nina, who are streaming in from New York, and Melissa, who is streaming in from Austin. Hopefully you've enjoyed the fairly diverse presentations today. We will share links and some material about each of these presenters on the Balance-Unbalance social media platforms today, and the virtual projects page, which will launch on the Balance-Unbalance website, will have information and links to all of these projects spoken about. And there's a series of virtual projects that are unfolding across the day. So for those of you that are participating online, there's plenty of ways that you can be part of Balance-Unbalance without physically being in Colombia. And on that note, I just wanted to say thank you to Emmanuel, who's been running our tech on the ground in Colombia for this panel and doing lots of other things, and has been certainly doing a lot for numerous projects to make them happen, as I'm unexpectedly in Australia instead of Colombia. So thank you, Emmanuel, and thank you to everyone on the panel. So we're going to end this broadcast, and for those of you that are online, there's another YouTube Hangout starting in about 10 minutes that will go live. That is called the Live Audio Archive, and this session will have a series of people in the room in Colombia and people streaming in from across the world talking about the potential of live streaming sound. So certainly a perfect panel to follow this one, where we've just created this foundation of the possibilities of sound in response to climate change. So unless there's anything to add from the room there, I'm going to end this broadcast, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye.